Welcome back to the news today. This is the Daily Debate. Yes, in 3 hours, exit polls in the British elections will be published, and we will know who will be the next British Prime Minister, or will we know, really, who will be the next Prime Minister? Poll shows this election is one of the tightest in British history, and it seems that the results will open the door to coalition negotiations that will determine the next Prime Minister, just like a little country in the Middle East that you know or might not, Israel. With me is right now to discuss this is Paul Gross, former assistant to a member of a British Parliament. Good evening.
Hello.
And also political analyst Tom Gross.
Good evening. Hi, Lucy.
No, they're not related, if you're asking. So we put this aside. So before I'm starting to talk with you two, let's go live to London, where our correspondent Jonathan Sashadoti is just standing just before Westminster. So Jonathan, what are the latest updates that you can give us?
So with only a few hours left, people have been voting all day, and ministers are hoping that they will be re-elected or voted in. And we need 326 seats for any party to have a majority in order to form a government on their own. But this is seeming more and more unlikely, as the polls throughout the campaign period have been showing that the highest likelihood is of a hung parliament, which will of course mean, as you said, a coalition government of some sort, or even a minority rule government. And this is something which is relatively new territory for generations of Britons who haven't really known this until the 2010 election, when we had that Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition.
So, Jonathan, what are the chances that the polls, in this really, really small country in the Middle East, will be wrong and somebody will win in a big win, like what happened here?
It has happened before that the polls were wrong. In the 90s, John Major won for the Conservatives after a period when polls showed almost the same thing they've been showing for the last few weeks here, which is a sort of neck-and-neck race between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. But it does seem unlikely. Polling these days is relatively accurate, though, of course, as you say, the experience in Israel shows that it is not perfect. There is also the phenomenon known as shy Conservatives, where people are not inclined to tell pollsters that they might vote Conservative. And, of course, many in the Tory party are hoping that that might be the case and they may steal a victory after all.
You know, Jonathan, I love the smile that you gave about the polls in Israel being not that accurate. Thank you very, very much for this. Of course, you will continue broadcasting and reporting from London during the night. Thank you very much. So let's go back and speak here. Paul and Tom try to explain to me, because he just, Jonathan just mentioned the 90s, and he mentioned 92. What happened since this big election in 92 that maybe in one way or another gave a different spin to the British elections?
Well, I think since 92 what you've had is, and not counting the last election, which is, as you said, was a coalition, you have had a Labour won all those elections from after 92 to the last election, and you had essentially a very popular, more or less popular figure, Prime Minister in Tony Blair, and an opposition, the Conservative Party, that hadn't managed to get itself into a position to attract votes back. It was seen as extreme in some areas. It was seen as not. It hadn't sort of grabbed that centre ground that parties need, I think, in order to be elected, especially in the one-party situation that you usually have in the UK. And Labour won all those elections, and then in 2010, the Conservatives became the largest party, not big enough, surprisingly, to get enough seats on their own. Had to go into coalition with the Liberal Democrats, and it looks like this time around is going to be even more bizarre by British standards, and even smaller parties, nationalist parties, sectoral parties, single-issue parties are going to hold the balance of power.
Yeah, and it's sectoral. Why? Because Britain is becoming more not like the left and the right. It's becoming more coloured society with the immigrants and immigration and stuff.
I don't think it's that. First of all, we have the fact about Scotland. Last year, as you probably recall, there was a referendum on whether Scotland should be independent, and that was narrowed narrowly defeated. But despite the fact it was defeated, it let a genie out of the bottle in Scottish nationalism. So what we're going to probably see tonight is there are 59 constituencies in Scotland. It is possible that the Scottish National Party are going to win all 59 of them. At the present time, they only have 6 members of Parliament. They may have 59, giving them...
And they are close with the Labour.
Well, they're to the left of Labour, but the leader of the Labour Party is already publicly ruled out forming a coalition with them because he says they want to break up the United Kingdom and make an independent Scotland, and he is against that. So what he said adamantly is he will not form any kind of government with them. However, if you look at the electoral math, he would have to form a government with them. And then we have an interesting situation because they are not only nationalistic for Scotland, but they are left-wing nationalists. So, for example, vis-a-vis Israel, for example, they are very opposed to many of Israeli policies and so on. They flirted with boycott movements of Israel and so on. So, in fact, one of the elements which Labour and the Scottish nationalists may find in common is to have a robust foreign policy against the state of Israel, because they don't actually have that much in common.
You know, I want to take you to what the concern is that people in Britain have, and the concern is economy, like each and every one of us that we are worried. But specifically in Britain, it's more about the health system and what is happening right now in the health system, because this is one of the biggest issues that people talked about in this campaign.
Well, I'm sure Paul will agree that the national health system that was formed in the aftermath of the Second World War is a matter of great pride for Britain. However, with a rising ageing population and increasing health costs, it's not as efficient as it used to be, and there are serious questions about its future. I don't know what...
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, it's this real sort of sacred cow in British society and British politics. It can't be touched. So even sort of the Thatcher years, when Britain became a much more neoliberal, capitalist society, even Thatcher wouldn't touch the National Health Service. And so it's the whole idea of a socialised system where everyone can get free healthcare available to everyone is something that no one's willing to touch. But as Tom said, it's probably not sustainable in its current form. So what do you do with that? How do you keep the values of the NHS whilst somehow making it more economically viable?
And yes.
Yeah. No, I think one other interesting thing for viewers of I-24 is that the leader of the Labour Party, who may become the Prime Minister, Ed Miliband, would be the first Jewish Prime Minister of Britain. Disraeli in the 19th century, his parents were Jewish, but he had converted to Christianity. Miliband is an atheist, but he's a secular Jew in essence. He's still Jewish, and in fact, he's a son of Holocaust refugees. His grandfather was killed in the Holocaust. And so on.
This is a big, huge issue, because we are talking about Britain. We are talking about maybe the next Prime Minister of Britain being a Jewish man and actually not agreeing with Israel on a lot of issues. So
this is the thing. This is despite the fact that he could be the first Jewish Prime Minister, not counting Disraeli. There's the polls have shown that the majority of British Jews are turning, even those that were inclined towards Labour, are turning away from Labour to some extent towards the Conservatives because of the things that Miliband has said about Israel. Because, he uses the same language, two-state solution, secure Israel, all this kind of stuff. But during Operation Protective Edge in the summer, he was very critical of Israel. He talked about it being an unjustified attack on Gaza by Israel. Contrast that with David Cameron, who's gone out of his way, especially in recent weeks and months, to say that I'm a prime minister. I know what it's like to have the safety and security of my citizens as the first thing on my mind when I get up in the morning, and I understand that Israel has to defend its citizens.
What is the strength of the Jewish community in Britain? Because in the United States, it's a big issue.
It's a much smaller community. However, Jewish community, it's a system where you elect your member of parliament from a constituency, from a geographic area. So there are certain neighbourhoods where Jews live, where Jews are quite sizable numbers of voters in those constituencies. So some of the most marginal constituencies, like Hendon in North London, I don't know, it's about 35% Jewish. So it does matter. But I just want to add one thing. It's not only a question of Israel why Jews are a bit wary of the Labour Party. They're also wary of the fact that Ed Miliband is perceived to have flirted with, let's say, Islamists. So, for example, last Saturday evening in Birmingham, Britain's second city, there was a Labour election rally, and they had segregated seating between men and women to placate the local imam. And this is Labour Party is the party of the left, and men and women should be equal. And it's a political thing, not a religious thing. We're not in a mosque or synagogue or whatever. So there is a question as why is the Labour Party having segregated seating between men and women in an election rally? So in Britain, it's not British Jews are not just worried maybe about Israel. They look to France across the Channel. They see attacks in France, and they're nervous of the more, let's say, the extreme elements within Britain's very large Muslim community. And even if it's only 2 or 3%, there are some real extremists there, and they're nervous about somehow placating them, and they're worried Labour might do it.
Just to follow up from that, to go back to your original point about the Scottish Nationalists and the coalition, the Scottish Nationalist Party and also the Green Party, which is a very, very small but growing in influence somewhat in British politics, are further to the left than Labour. And if, as looks to be the case, Labour would need the support of parties further to the left to in order to become a government, they could well be dragged to the left on these issues as well. To some extent, getting into bed with the Islamist factions in British society, which unfortunately is something we've seen so much in Britain and Europe with far left groups.
So just a few months ago, we talked about UKIP and the Nigel Farage, and this small party that got a lot of attention in this election. Where is it getting into the equation in this specific?
They're predicted to get between 10 and 13% of the vote. However, the way it works with the British system is that will not translate into members of Parliament because you've got this first past the post system, as they call it. So in fact, the Scottish Nationalists are predicted to only get 4% of the national vote, but yet 59 members of Parliament, whereas UKIP are going to get maybe 13%, but only get 4 or 5 members of Parliament. Some would say, as bad as complicated as a system like Israel's is, it's far more just and fairer because people do, if you get 13% of the vote, in theory you get 13% of the members of the Knesset.
Yes.
That does not work in Britain at all. So it's very much case by case, constituency by constituency. But what I would say about UKIP is even though they won't get seats, they have pushed the agenda somewhat with the Conservative Party on issues like immigration. And in fact, what concerns many people, including businessmen in Britain, is that under pressure from UKIP, the Prime Minister, the leader of the Conservative Party, has promised to have a referendum in 2 years about whether Britain should leave the European Union.
In one way or another, UKIP is giving, let's say, the same smell of the wind that is floating right now in Europe. So either way, you're saying that according to the system, they are not going to get power in this upcoming election.
But they have influence.
Yeah, they definitely have influence, and I think they're reminiscent of other parties, other anti-immigrant sort of concern about playing on that concern of foreigners coming in and that kind of thing. And I think that the referendum that Tom referred to, David Cameron is pledged to do that. Now, if let's say we're back to where we are now with a government of the Conservative and the Liberal Democrats might want to play hardball and say, because they're very pro-European, so they might say, no, we don't want to have this referendum, so we insist that in order to form a government, you won't have that referendum on the EU. And they'll be playing hardball in the same way as we know to some extent happens in this country. I'm trying to imagine, because the first slogan of Benjamin Netanyahu in the elections was go vote for Benjamin Netanyahu, he will change the system. Do you think that the system should be changed in Britain?
Good question. The problem is with democracy, as Churchill said, he said it's the least worst system, or it's 2 cheers for democracy, not 3 cheers. there are pluses and minuses of the British system, and there are pluses and minuses of, say, the Israeli system. You know, in Israel you have a pure democracy, but then you get complete chaos where you have too many parties in government and too much instability. And I think what most
Say it to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Exactly. So what I think what most people want is a degree of stability, because it's very difficult to govern with instability. And as in Israel, with the new government being formed last night, with the next British government, we could also have a degree of instability. And that's not really good for anybody, because things don't get done, the economy doesn't move on, and so on. So I don't know which is the better system.
And stability is supposed to be the payoff. You know, there's supposed to be a spectrum of, you know, the more democratic you go, the more pure democracy you go, the less stable it is. So Israel's more democratic but less stable. Britain perhaps is less democratic in the purest sense, but more stable. But here you've got a situation where they keep the first past the post systems. It's supposed to create stable governments, and this time round, maybe not. So this could be, who knows, this could be the impetus for change.
And I can tell you that in England, it's much more polite than in Israel.
Well, this campaign's been less polite than usual. There's been some
less polite than usual.
Yes, but still not we're not on Israeli level.
No.
Not like Israel. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Two crosses here. Going out for a small break, 2 minutes, and I'll be back.